rather the decision that something else was more important than fear. As she stood in a makeshift command center, surrounded by the chaos of military operations in a war-torn region, she felt that familiar knot in her stomach that came before every mission. The air was thick with tension, radio chatter, and the distant sound of artillery fire that had become as common as breathing. The briefing room was packed with soldiers, their faces etched with the kind of exhaustion that comes from months of combat. Maps covered every available surface, marked with red zones that seemed to grow larger each day. Sarah had been part of this unit for 8 months now, ever since she volunteered for the Special Operations Division. What started as a routine deployment had turned into something much more dangerous and personal. She remembered the day she first arrived at the forward operating base. The other soldiers had looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Women in combat roles were still relatively new, and in special operations, they were practically unheard of. Sarah had fought hard to earn her place here, graduating top of her class in every training program, mastering skills that most men struggled with, and proving time and again that she belonged. The unit she joined was unlike any other. They called themselves Ghost Company, a fitting name for soldiers who operated in the shadows, completing missions that officially never happened. Sarah had quickly earned the respect of her fellow soldiers through her quick thinking, unwavering determination, and an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure. It was during her 3rd mission that she earned her call sign. The mission had gone wrong from the start. Intelligence reports were faulty, enemy positions were stronger than expected, and what should have been a simple extraction had turned into a nightmare. Sarah's squad was pinned down in an abandoned building, surrounded by hostile forces. Radio communications were spotty at best, and ammunition was running dangerously low. It was then that Sarah did something that would define her military career. While her squad leader tried desperately to reach command on the radio, Sarah noticed something others had missed. The building they were trapped in had an old maintenance tunnel that connected to a nearby structure. Without waiting for orders, she volunteered to crawl through the narrow, debris-filled tunnel to reach the other building and provide covering fire for her team's escape. The tunnel was barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. Broken concrete, twisted metal, and years of neglect had turned it into a claustrophobic nightmare. Sarah squeezed through, inch by inch, carrying her rifle and a backpack full of ammunition. The sound of gunfire above grew more intense, and she could hear her teammates calling for backup over the radio. When she finally emerged on the other side, Sarah found herself in perfect position to flank the enemy forces. From her elevated position in the abandoned building, she could see the entire battlefield spread out below. She began picking off enemy combatants with precision shots, one by one, creating confusion and allowing her team to regroup and fight back effectively. But it was what happened next that truly earned her the call sign Specter 6. As enemy forces tried to locate the source of the sniper fire, Sarah seemed to vanish and reappear in different positions around the building. Using her knowledge of urban warfare and her small stature to her advantage, she moved through the structure like a ghost, appearing just long enough to take a shot before disappearing again. The enemy forces, already rattled by the unexpected flanking maneuver, began to panic. Reports came over their radio frequencies of a phantom sniper who couldn't be located or eliminated. Sarah's teammates watched in amazement as she systematically dismantled the enemy position, moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost supernatural. By the time reinforcements arrived, the immediate threat had been neutralized. Sarah's squad had suffered no casualties, and they had successfully completed their extraction mission. When the after-action report was filed, her squad leader recommended her for commendation, noting her ghost-like movements and deadly precision under extreme pressure. The call sign Specter 6 stuck immediately. Other soldiers began using it with a mixture of respect and awe. Sarah had proven that she wasn't just capable of keeping up with the elite soldiers of Ghost Company. She was setting the standard for what it meant to be exceptional. Over the following months, Sarah's reputation grew throughout the military community. Stories of Specter 6 spread from unit to unit, often exaggerated in the telling, but always centered around the same core truth. There was a soldier out there who could accomplish the impossible when it mattered most. She participated in dozens of classified operations, each one adding to her legend. There was the mission where she single-handedly held off an enemy assault for 3 hours while her team evacuated civilians. The night operation where she infiltrated an enemy compound and extracted vital intelligence without firing a single shot. The rescue mission where she rappelled from a helicopter into hostile territory to save a downed pilot. Each mission brought new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself. Sarah never sought the spotlight or the recognition that came with her growing reputation. She was driven by something deeper, a profound sense of duty to her country, her fellow soldiers, and the innocent people caught in the crossfire of war. The other members of Ghost Company had become like family to her. They shared the unique bond that forms between people who have faced life and death together repeatedly. They trusted each other completely, knew each other's strengths and weaknesses, and would do anything to protect one another. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, the squad's communication specialist, had become one of Sarah's closest friends. He was the one who first started using her call sign over the radio, and he took pride in the fact that his captain had become something of a legend. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, the unit's medic, provided a steady presence and often served as Sarah's confidant during the long, stressful deployments. Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, their commanding officer, had initially been skeptical about having a woman in his special operations unit. But Sarah's performance had quickly won him over, and he became one of her strongest advocates. He made sure she received the training and opportunities she needed to excel, and he protected her from the bureaucratic obstacles that sometimes arose. As weeks turned into months, Sarah found herself taking on increasingly complex and dangerous missions. Her success rate was unprecedented, and she had developed an almost instinctive understanding of combat tactics and strategy. She could read a battlefield like others read a book, anticipating enemy movements and identifying weaknesses that others missed. But success came with a price. The constant stress of combat operations, the weight of responsibility for her team's safety, and the psychological toll of taking enemy lives began to accumulate. Sarah started having trouble sleeping, experiencing vivid nightmares about missions gone wrong. She found herself constantly alert, unable to truly relax even during downtime. The military counselors called it combat stress reaction, and they assured her that it was a normal response to the extreme conditions she was operating under. They recommended rest and rotation back to a safer assignment, but Sarah refused. Her team needed her, and she couldn't abandon them when they were in the middle of such critical operations. It was during this period that Sarah received word that her unit was being assigned to their most dangerous mission yet. Intelligence had identified a high-value target, a terrorist leader responsible for numerous attacks on civilian populations. The target was hiding in a heavily fortified compound deep in enemy territory, protected by multiple layers of security and early warning systems. The mission would require everything Sarah had learned during her time with Ghost Company. It would test not only her tactical skills, but also her leadership abilities and her capacity to make life and death decisions under extreme pressure. As she studied the mission briefings and satellite imagery, Sarah knew that this operation would either cement her reputation as one of the military's most elite soldiers or end her career permanently. The preparation for the mission took weeks. Every detail had to be perfect, every contingency planned for, every possible scenario wargamed until the team could execute their roles flawlessly. Sarah threw herself into the planning with characteristic intensity, working 18-hour days and reviewing intelligence reports until she could visualize every building, every street, every potential obstacle they might encounter. As the departure date approached, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that preceded every major operation. She had led her team through countless dangerous missions, but this one felt different somehow. The stakes were higher, the risks greater, and the margin for error virtually non-existent. On the night before the mission, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, writing letters to her family that she hoped would never need to be delivered. She thought about the path that had brought her to this point, the years of training, the sacrifices she had made, the friends she had lost along the way. She thought about the young woman who had first enlisted in the military, full of idealism and determination to make a difference in the world. That woman seemed like a stranger now. Combat had changed Sarah in ways she was still discovering. She had seen things that would haunt her for the rest of her life, made decisions that no person should ever have to make, and carried burdens that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. But she had also discovered reserves of strength and courage that she never knew she possessed. As she prepared for what could be her final mission, Sarah reflected on the meaning of the call sign she had earned. Specter 6 wasn't just a name, it was a representation of who she had become. She was a soldier who operated in the shadows, who appeared when she was needed most, and who could accomplish the impossible when everything else had failed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, and new opportunities to prove that she deserved the trust that had been placed in her. Whatever happened, Sarah knew that she would face it with the same courage and determination that had carried her through every previous trial. She was Specter 6, and she would never let her team down. The mission began at 0400 hours under a moonless sky. Sarah and her team of 12 elite soldiers moved through the darkness like shadows, their equipment carefully chosen to minimize noise and maximize effectiveness. Each member of Ghost Company knew their role perfectly, having rehearsed the operation dozens of times until their movements became instinctive. The target compound was located in a valley surrounded by steep hills, making traditional assault approaches nearly impossible. Sarah had developed a strategy that relied on stealth and precision rather than overwhelming force. The team would infiltrate in 3 separate groups, converge on the compound from different directions, and extract the high-value target before enemy forces could mount an effective response. Sarah led the primary assault team, consisting of herself, Rodriguez, and 2 other soldiers. Their job was to penetrate the compound's inner perimeter and locate the target. Walsh commanded the support team, positioned on the surrounding hills, to provide sniper support and early warning of enemy reinforcements. The 3rd team, led by Staff Sergeant Thompson, would secure the extraction route and establish a defensive perimeter. The approach to the compound took 4 hours of careful movement across difficult terrain. Sarah's team had to navigate through minefields, avoid patrol routes, and bypass several security checkpoints without being detected. They moved with the patience of hunters, advancing only when they were certain the way was clear, freezing motionless when any sound or movement might give away their position. As they crested the final hill overlooking the target, Sarah used her night vision scope to study the compound layout. The intelligence reports had been accurate. The building was a 3-story structure surrounded by high walls and guard towers. Armed sentries patrolled the perimeter at regular intervals, their movements predictable enough to exploit. Sarah identified 17 enemy combatants in the immediate area, with likely reinforcements in nearby buildings. The target was believed to be on the 2nd floor of the main building, but reaching him would require neutralizing multiple layers of security without raising an alarm. It was the kind of challenge that would have seemed impossible to most military units, but Ghost Company had built their reputation on accomplishing the impossible. The infiltration began at 0800 hours. Walsh's sniper team eliminated 2 perimeter guards with silenced weapons, creating a narrow window for Sarah's team to approach the compound wall. Rodriguez used specialized climbing equipment to scale the 15-foot barrier, then lowered a rope for the others to follow. Within minutes, all 4 members of the assault team were inside the compound. Sarah led them through the courtyard using hand signals, her movements fluid and silent. Years of training and combat experience had given her an almost supernatural awareness of her surroundings. She could sense danger before it became visible, anticipate enemy movements based on subtle changes in sound and shadow, and navigate complex environments with deadly efficiency. The 1st floor of the main building was heavily guarded, with at least 6 armed men stationed at various checkpoints. Sarah's team split into pairs, with each duo responsible for clearing half of the building. They moved room by room, neutralizing threats with quick, silent takedowns that left no opportunity for the enemy to raise an alarm. As they reached the stairway to the 2nd floor, Sarah encountered her first major obstacle. 2 guards were stationed at the top of the stairs, positioned so that any approach from below would be immediately visible. Traditional assault tactics would require a direct confrontation that could compromise the mission's stealth requirements. Instead, Sarah demonstrated the innovative thinking that had earned her reputation. She noticed that the building's architecture included decorative balconies on the exterior walls. Using rope and climbing equipment, she exited through a 1st-floor window and scaled the outside of the building, approaching the 2nd floor from an unexpected direction. The exterior climb was treacherous, requiring her to navigate across crumbling masonry and exposed pipes while carrying full combat equipment. One slip would mean a potentially fatal fall, and any noise would alert the guards inside. Sarah moved with the grace of a professional climber, testing each handhold carefully before committing her weight, breathing slowly to maintain focus despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. When she reached the second-floor balcony, Sarah found herself directly outside what intelligence suggested was the target's room. Through a gap in the curtains, she could see a man matching the target's description sitting at a desk, apparently reviewing documents. Two bodyguards stood nearby, their attention focused on the room's main entrance rather than the windows. Sarah faced a critical decision. She could breach through the window immediately, but that would abandon her team and leave them to handle the building's remaining security alone. Alternatively, she could work her way back inside and coordinate a synchronized assault with her teammates, but that would risk losing the element of surprise if the target decided to move locations. She chose a third option that demonstrated the tactical flexibility that made her exceptional. Using her radio's silent vibration mode, she signaled Rodriguez to create a distraction on the first floor. 30 seconds later, the sound of breaking glass echoed through the building as Rodriguez accidentally knocked over a vase while clearing a room. The noise was subtle enough to avoid raising a general alarm, but it was sufficient to draw the attention of the second-floor guards. As they moved toward the stairway to investigate, Sarah slipped through the balcony door and positioned herself behind the target's bodyguards. Before they could react to her presence, she had neutralized both men with swift, silent movements. The target looked up from his documents to find Sarah standing before him, her weapon trained on his chest. For a moment, neither of them moved. The man who had orchestrated countless terrorist attacks, who had evaded capture for years through cunning and brutality, found himself face-to-face with a soldier whose reputation had grown to near mythical proportions among his own forces. "You're Specter 6, he said quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of fear and resignation. The fact that he recognized her call sign spoke to how widely her reputation had spread throughout the enemy networks. Sarah said nothing, maintaining her professional composure while her team secured the rest of the building. The extraction had to be completed quickly before enemy reinforcements could arrive. Rodriguez and the others reached the second floor within minutes, having cleared the remaining resistance with characteristic efficiency. The target offered no resistance as Sarah's team prepared him for transport. He seemed to understand that any attempt to escape or fight back would be futile. Sarah had captured dozens of high-value targets during her career, and she had learned to read the signs of defeat in their faces. This man knew that his war was over. The extraction from the compound proceeded smoothly until they reached the perimeter wall. Walsh's voice crackled over the radio with urgent warning. Multiple vehicles approaching from the east. Estimated arrival time, 4 minutes. You need to move now. Sarah made another split-second decision that saved her team's lives. Instead of attempting to scale the wall with their prisoner, which would take precious time they didn't have, she led them to a storm drain that connected to the compound's water management system. The drain was cramped and partially flooded, but it provided concealed access to the extraction point. The team crawled through the drainage system for nearly half a mile, dragging their prisoner through mud and standing water while enemy forces searched the compound above. Sarah led the way, using her tactical light to navigate the underground maze while monitoring radio communications from the surface. When they finally emerged at the designated extraction point, the helicopter was already waiting. Thompson's team had secured the landing zone and established defensive positions to cover their departure. Sarah's team loaded the prisoner aboard the aircraft and lifted off just as enemy reinforcements arrived at the compound. As the helicopter climbed away from the target area, Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The mission had been completed successfully, with no casualties among her team and minimal collateral damage. The high-value target was in custody, and the intelligence he possessed would likely prevent future terrorist attacks. But Sarah's sense of accomplishment was tempered by the knowledge that this was just one victory in a much larger conflict. There would be other missions, other targets, other opportunities to prove herself in combat. The war against terrorism was far from over, and soldiers like her would continue to be called upon to take on the most dangerous assignments. During the flight back to base, Sarah reflected on how much she had changed since joining Ghost Company. The young woman who had first volunteered for special operations had been motivated primarily by a desire to prove herself capable of handling any challenge. Now, her motivations were more complex and mature. She fought not just for personal achievement, but for the safety of innocent people who couldn't protect themselves. She led her team not just to accomplish missions, but to bring them home safely to their families. She had learned that true courage wasn't about fearlessness, but about doing what was right despite being afraid. The helicopter touched down at the forward operating base as dawn broke over the horizon. Sarah's team disembarked and handed their prisoner over to intelligence officers for debriefing and interrogation. The formal after-action reports would be filed later, but Sarah already knew that this mission would be remembered as another success for Ghost Company. As she walked toward her quarters, Sarah was approached by her commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Patterson. His expression was more serious than usual, and she sensed that something significant was about to happen. "Outstanding work out there, Captain," Patterson said. "But I need to inform you that we've received new orders. You're being reassigned to a joint task force operation. Pack your gear. You leave for the capital in 6 hours." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Reassignment to a joint task force usually meant working with senior officers from multiple branches of the military, often on missions of strategic importance. It also meant leaving Ghost Company behind, at least temporarily, and adapting to working with unfamiliar personnel and procedures. "What kind of operation, sir?" she asked. Patterson's expression grew even more grave. "That's classified above my level. All I can tell you is that they specifically requested you by call sign. Someone in the chain of command knows about Specter 6, and they want her for something important." As Sarah packed her equipment and prepared to leave the only military unit she had ever truly considered home, she wondered what new challenges awaited her. The reputation she had built through months of successful operations was apparently opening doors she hadn't even known existed. 6 hours later, she was aboard a military transport aircraft, flying toward an uncertain future. The other passengers were senior officers from various branches of the armed forces, all apparently assigned to the same classified operation. None of them spoke about their mission, but the tension in the aircraft was palpable. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to rest during the flight, knowing that whatever lay ahead would likely test her skills and resolve in ways she hadn't yet experienced. She had proven herself capable of handling the most dangerous combat operations, but military politics and high-level strategy were different kinds of battlefields entirely. As the aircraft approached its destination, Sarah steeled herself for the next chapter of her military career. Whatever challenges awaited her, she would face them with the same determination and skill that had earned her the call sign Specter 6. She was ready for anything. The Pentagon at dawn was a sight that never failed to impress even the most experienced military personnel. As Sarah's transport vehicle approached the massive building, she felt a mixture of awe and apprehension. She had been summoned to the highest levels of military command for reasons that remained mysterious, and the uncertainty gnawed at her despite her best efforts to remain calm and professional. Sarah was escorted through security checkpoints and long corridors filled with officers whose rank and ribbon spoke of decades of distinguished service. She felt somewhat out of place among these senior personnel, but her confidence had been earned through combat experience that few of them could match. The call sign Specter 6 might not mean much in the halls of bureaucracy, but it carried weight in the places where wars were actually fought. The briefing room she was led to contained 12 other officers, all colonel level or above, representing every branch of the military. At the head of the table sat a man whose presence immediately commanded respect. General Marcus Wheeler, one of the most decorated and influential officers in the entire armed forces. His gray hair and weathered face spoke of a lifetime spent in service to his country, and his reputation for tactical brilliance was legendary throughout the military community. Sarah took the seat she was directed to, noting that she was by far the most junior officer present. Several of the other attendees glanced at her with curiosity, clearly wondering why a captain had been included in what was obviously a high-level strategic meeting. She kept her expression neutral and professional, waiting for the briefing to begin. General Wheeler stood and activated a large display screen that showed a map of the Middle East with several areas highlighted in red. "Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "You have been selected for Operation Silent Thunder, a joint task force mission of critical importance to national security." The briefing that followed revealed the scope and complexity of the operation. Intelligence had identified a network of terrorist cells operating across multiple countries, coordinating attacks through sophisticated communication systems and sharing resources in ways that made them extremely difficult to combat using traditional military approaches. The network's leadership was highly mobile, constantly shifting locations and using advanced counter-surveillance techniques to avoid detection. "The previous attempts to dismantle this network have failed," General Wheeler continued, "because we've been fighting them using conventional tactics against an unconventional enemy. This operation will require a new approach, small teams operating independently, with minimal support and maximum flexibility." Sarah began to understand why she had been summoned. The mission profile was perfectly suited to her skills and experience with Ghost Company. While the other officers in the room were experts in large-scale operations and strategic planning, she had spent months perfecting the art of small unit tactics and independent operations. The general outlined the structure of the task force. Each team would consist of 3 to 5 highly skilled operators, led by an officer with proven experience in special operations. The teams would be deployed to different regions, tasked with infiltrating the terrorist network and gathering intelligence while disrupting their operations through targeted strikes. Team assignments will be based on experience and specialization, General Wheeler announced. Team Alpha will be led by Colonel Martinez, focusing on the northern region. Team Beta, under Lieutenant Colonel Johnson, will handle coastal operations. Team Charlie will be commanded by... He paused and looked directly at Sarah. "Captain Chun." Sarah felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Several of the senior officers looked surprised, and she could practically hear their unspoken questions about why a captain was being given command of a team that would normally be led by someone with much higher rank. General Wheeler seemed to anticipate their concerns. Captain Chin's unconventional background and unique skill set make her the ideal choice for Team Charlie's mission profile. Her team will be handling the most challenging assignment, penetrating the network's inner circle and identifying their primary leadership structure. After the general briefing, Sarah was escorted to a smaller conference room where she met the other members of Team Charlie. Major David Kim, a logistics and intelligence specialist with extensive experience in covert operations. Master Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, not related to her friend from Ghost Company, an explosives expert and communications specialist. Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams, a combat medic with sniper training and language skills in Arabic and Farsi. The team members were all volunteers who had specifically requested assignment to the operation after learning about its unconventional nature. They had studied Sarah's service record and were eager to work with someone whose reputation in special operations circles had grown to almost mythical proportions. "We know who you are," Major Kim said during their first team meeting. "The question is, are you ready to lead a mission where the rules of engagement are deliberately ambiguous and the margin for error is essentially zero?" Sarah appreciated his directness. "I've been operating in gray areas for most of my military career," she replied. "The only difference is that now it's officially sanctioned." The team spent the next 3 weeks in intensive preparation and planning. Their target area was a region known for its complex tribal politics and shifting allegiances, where terrorist cells operated with the tacit support of some local populations while being hunted by others. Success would require not just military skills, but cultural sensitivity and the ability to build trust with people who had every reason to be suspicious of foreign soldiers. Sarah immersed herself in studying the region's history, politics, and social dynamics. She learned enough of the local language to conduct basic conversations and familiarize herself with religious and cultural practices that could affect her team's operations. The other members of Team Charlie pursued similar preparation, each focusing on their areas of expertise. The intelligence picture they were working with was frustratingly incomplete. The terrorist network they were targeting had proven extremely effective at maintaining operational security. Traditional surveillance methods had yielded limited results, and previous attempts to infiltrate the organization had ended in failure or worse. "We're essentially going in blind," Major Kim observed during one planning session. "We know the network exists, and we know it's dangerous, but we don't know how it's structured or who's really running it. Sarah nodded grimly. That's why we're not going to try to fight them conventionally. We're going to become part of their world until we understand it well enough to dismantle it from within. The strategy Sarah developed was risky and unconventional, even by special operations standards. Instead of attempting to infiltrate the network through military means, Team Charlie would establish themselves as independent contractors, mercenaries, and specialists willing to work for anyone willing to pay. It was a cover story that would allow them to make contact with the network without immediately triggering security concerns. 3 days before deployment, Sarah received an unexpected summons to report to General Wheeler's office. She found him studying personnel files and intelligence reports, his expression more serious than she had seen during the initial briefing. "Sit down, Captain," he said without looking up from his reading. "I want to have a frank discussion about what you're walking into." The general set aside his papers and looked directly at Sarah. The other officers in this task force have decades of experience and extensive support networks. You're being asked to accomplish the same mission with less experience and fewer resources. Some people in the chain of command think I'm making a mistake by giving you this assignment. Sarah kept her expression neutral, waiting for him to continue. "The reason I'm sending you," General Wheeler continued, "is because conventional thinking and traditional approaches have failed repeatedly against this particular enemy. Your reputation suggests that you don't think conventionally, and your success rate indicates that unconventional approaches work for you." He leaned forward in his chair. "But I need to know that you understand the stakes. This isn't just another special operations mission. The intelligence we gather from this operation will determine how we fight terrorism for the next decade. If we succeed, we'll have a roadmap for dismantling similar networks around the world. If we fail, we won't fail, sir," Sarah said with quiet confidence. General Wheeler studied her face carefully. "What makes you so certain?" Sarah thought about all the missions she had completed with Ghost Company, all the impossible situations she had navigated successfully, all the times when victory had seemed impossible until it became inevitable. Because failure isn't an option when people's lives depend on success. My team and I will find a way to accomplish the mission, regardless of the obstacles we encounter. The general nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I hoped you would say. You deploy tomorrow at 0600 hours. Your communication protocols and emergency extraction procedures are in your mission packet. Once you're in the field, you'll be operating with minimal support and maximum autonomy." As Sarah left the general's office, she felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that preceded every major operation. But this time, the stakes felt higher than ever before. She wasn't just leading a team into combat. She was carrying the responsibility for an operation that could reshape the entire approach to fighting terrorism. That evening, Sarah called her parents for what might be the last time in months. She couldn't tell them where she was going or what she would be doing, but she wanted to hear their voices before disappearing into the shadows of covert operations. "We're proud of you, sweetheart," her mother said, her voice carrying the mixture of love and worry that military families knew all too well. "Whatever you're doing, we know you'll do it with honor." Her father, a veteran himself, seemed to understand without being told that this deployment was different from the others. "Come home safe," he said simply. "Everything else is just details." After ending the call, Sarah spent the night reviewing mission plans and equipment lists one final time. Team Charlie would be deploying to a remote forward operating base, from which they would begin their infiltration of the terrorist network. The success of their mission would depend on their ability to blend into a dangerous and unfamiliar environment while gathering intelligence and maintaining their cover identities. As dawn approached, Sarah felt ready for the challenges ahead. She had proven herself capable of handling the most dangerous combat operations, and now she would have the opportunity to demonstrate her abilities on a strategic level. Whatever obstacles lay ahead, she would face them with the same determination and skill that had earned her the call sign Specter 6. The reputation she had built through months of successful operations was about to be tested in ways she had never imagined. But Sarah was confident that she and her team would rise to meet any challenge, no matter how difficult or dangerous it might prove to be. The war on terrorism was entering a new phase, and Specter 6 would be leading the charge into uncharted territory. 6 months into Operation Silent Thunder, Sarah had transformed from a decorated combat officer into something entirely different, a ghost operating in the spaces between worlds. Team Charlie had successfully infiltrated the terrorist network by establishing themselves as freelance security consultants, a cover that allowed them to move freely through the region while gathering intelligence on their targets. The mission had required Sarah to abandon almost everything that defined her military identity. Gone were the uniforms, the clear chain of command, and the straightforward rules of engagement that had governed her previous operations. In their place were civilian clothes, false identities, and a constant need to balance multiple deceptions while maintaining operational security. Sarah now went by the name Sarah Khalil, presenting herself as a former military contractor with expertise in small unit tactics and urban warfare. Her team members had adopted similar cover identities, each drawing on their real backgrounds while creating plausible explanations for their presence in the region. The terrorist network they were investigating had proven even more sophisticated than initial intelligence reports suggested. Rather than operating as a traditional hierarchical organization, it functioned more like a criminal enterprise, with multiple semi-independent cells coordinating through a complex web of intermediaries and cutouts. Over the past 6 months, Sarah's team had worked their way into the confidence of several mid-level operatives, providing security services and training in exchange for access to the network's operations. It was dangerous work that required constant vigilance and perfect performance of their cover identities. The psychological strain of living a double life was unlike anything Sarah had experienced during her conventional military career. Every conversation was a potential trap, every relationship a possible threat to operational security. The slightest mistake in maintaining her cover identity could expose not just herself, but her entire team and the broader mission. Major Kim had proven particularly adept at gathering intelligence through his role as a logistics coordinator. His background in supply chain management made him invaluable to network operatives who needed to move weapons and equipment across international borders. Through careful observation and strategic conversations, he had begun to map the network's financial structure and supply chains. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had established herself as an explosives expert, providing training and technical support to cells planning various operations. The intelligence she gathered about the network's capabilities and intentions had already allowed military intelligence to prevent 3 separate terrorist attacks in other regions. Staff Sergeant Williams used his medical training to provide healthcare services to network members and their families, a role that gave him access to safe houses and operational centers that would otherwise have remained hidden. His language skills and cultural sensitivity had made him particularly effective at building trust within the organization. But it was Sarah's role that carried the greatest risk and responsibility. As the team's leader and primary contact with high-level network operatives, she was constantly walking a tightrope between maintaining her cover and gathering actionable intelligence. Every decision she made had the potential to either advance the mission or catastrophically compromise it. The breakthrough came during what appeared to be a routine security consultation. Sarah had been hired to assess vulnerabilities at a compound used by one of the network's senior operatives, a man known only as Al-Ghazi, who was believed to be one of the organization's key coordinators. While conducting the security assessment, Sarah discovered something that hadn't appeared in any previous intelligence reports. The compound contained a sophisticated communication center that appeared to be routing encrypted messages between cells across multiple countries. More importantly, the equipment and procedures she observed suggested that this was a primary coordination hub for the entire network. The discovery presented Sarah with both an opportunity and a dilemma. The communications center represented exactly the kind of target that Operation Silent Thunder had been designed to identify and neutralize. But exploiting this intelligence would require actions that could expose her team and potentially compromise months of careful infiltration work. Sarah made the decision to proceed with gathering more detailed intelligence about the communications center, despite the increased risk. Over the course of several weeks, she used her access to the compound to map the facility's layout, identify key personnel, and document the network's communication protocols. The information she gathered revealed the true scope and sophistication of the terrorist network. Rather than operating as isolated cells with minimal coordination, the organization was functioning as a unified entity with centralized command and control systems. This discovery fundamentally changed the military's understanding of the threat they were facing. But as Sarah prepared to transmit her intelligence findings to military command, she made a disturbing discovery. Al-Ghazi had begun asking detailed questions about her background, and some of his inquiries suggested that he was conducting his own investigation into her identity. The situation became critical when one of Al-Ghazi's security personnel approached Sarah with information that someone within the network had raised concerns about Sarah Khalil and her team. The source couldn't provide specifics, but it was clear that their cover identities were under scrutiny. Sarah faced the most difficult decision of her military career. She could extract her team immediately, protecting their lives, but potentially losing the most valuable intelligence breakthrough of the entire operation. Alternatively, she could maintain their positions and continue gathering information, knowing that discovery could mean torture and execution for all of them. After careful consideration and consultation with her team, Sarah chose a third option that reflected the tactical flexibility that had defined her military career. Rather than extracting or continuing the status quo, Team Charlie would accelerate their intelligence gathering while simultaneously preparing for emergency extraction. The plan required perfect timing and flawless execution. Sarah and her team would gather as much additional intelligence as possible over the next 72 hours, while simultaneously positioning themselves for rapid escape if their cover was blown. It was an extremely high-risk strategy that could either provide military intelligence with everything they needed to dismantle the network or result in the complete loss of the team. During this critical period, Sarah demonstrated the leadership qualities that had made her successful in conventional military operations. Despite the extreme stress and constant danger, she maintained team cohesion and operational effectiveness. Her calm confidence helped her teammates manage their fear and focus on their mission objectives. The intelligence gathering phase proved more successful than anyone had dared hope. Sarah's team was able to document the network's complete organizational structure, identify key leaders and their locations, map communication protocols and financial systems, and gather evidence of planned operations that were still in development. But as they prepared to initiate their extraction sequence, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Al-Ghazi confronted Sarah directly, informing her that background checks had revealed inconsistencies in her cover identity. He hadn't yet determined that she was a military operative, but he was clearly suspicious and had ordered enhanced security measures that would make extraction extremely difficult. Sarah realized that conventional extraction procedures would likely result in the capture or death of her team. The compound was now under heightened security with additional guards and new surveillance systems that made stealth approaches nearly impossible. Any attempt to leave through normal channels would trigger immediate pursuit by network operatives who knew the terrain far better than her team. Instead of panicking or reverting to standard procedures, Sarah developed an escape plan that relied on the same unconventional thinking that had made her successful in combat operations. Rather than trying to evade the network's security measures, Team Charlie would use those measures against their opponents. Sarah informed Al-Ghazi that she had discovered evidence of infiltration by intelligence operatives, information that was technically accurate, since her team was indeed conducting intelligence operations. She volunteered to help investigate the security breach, positioning her team as allies in the effort to identify and eliminate the threat. The deception worked brilliantly. Al-Ghazi, concerned about operational security and impressed by Sarah's apparent loyalty, gave her team expanded access to investigate the suspected infiltration. This access allowed them to position themselves for extraction while simultaneously gathering even more intelligence about the network security procedures and personnel. On the night of their planned extraction, Sarah's team executed one of the most audacious escape operations in Special Forces history. Using their insider knowledge of compound security and their cover as counterintelligence investigators, they systematically disabled surveillance systems and neutralized guards while making it appear that the facility was under attack by outside forces. The escape itself required Sarah to draw on every skill she had developed during her military career, leading her team through hostile territory while being pursued by operatives who knew every inch of the surrounding area. She had to navigate using only minimal equipment while ensuring that all 4 team members reached the extraction point safely. The extraction was complicated by the fact that their initial departure from the compound had triggered a network-wide alert. Cell operatives throughout the region were mobilized to search for the individuals responsible for what they believed was an attack on their primary communication facility. Sarah led her team through a running firefight that lasted nearly 8 hours, moving through terrain that varied from urban environments to open desert to mountainous wilderness. They were outnumbered by at least 10 to 1 and operating without air support or artillery backup that would normally be available for conventional military operations. But Sarah's reputation as Specter 6 had been built on exactly these kinds of impossible situations. Using tactics she had perfected during her time with Ghost Company, she kept her team mobile and unpredictable, striking at pursuing forces when they least expected it and melting away before they could mount effective counterattacks. The pursuit finally ended when Team Charlie reached their predetermined extraction coordinates, where a helicopter was waiting to carry them to safety. As they lifted off and climbed away from the hostile territory below, Sarah felt a mixture of exhaustion and accomplishment that was unlike anything she had experienced during previous operations. Operation Silent Thunder had been completed successfully. The intelligence gathered by Team Charlie would allow military forces to dismantle the terrorist network systematically, preventing countless future attacks and saving numerous innocent lives. But the cost of success had been higher than anyone had anticipated when the mission began. 6 months of living under deep cover had changed Sarah in fundamental ways. She had been forced to adopt a different personality, speak in ways that felt unnatural, and make decisions based on considerations that had nothing to do with military doctrine or conventional ethics. The psychological toll of maintaining multiple deceptions while operating in constant danger had pushed her to limits she hadn't known existed. As the helicopter carried Team Charlie toward debriefing and eventual return to conventional military service, Sarah reflected on how much she had changed since first earning her call sign. The young officer who had volunteered for special operations had grown into something more complex. A soldier who could operate effectively in any environment, under any conditions, facing any enemy. But she also recognized that the skills and experiences that made her effective in covert operations came with a cost. The ability to deceive others convincingly required a kind of psychological flexibility that could make it difficult to maintain normal relationships and conventional social connections. The woman who had earned the call sign Specter 6 through conventional combat operations had evolved into something different, a soldier who could disappear into any role, any identity, any situation where her country needed her to operate. She had become the kind of person who could save countless lives by living in the shadows, but who might struggle to find her place in the light. Years after Operation Silent Thunder, Sarah found herself standing in another briefing room, but this time the circumstances were entirely different. She was no longer the junior officer seeking to prove herself worthy of elite assignments. Her service record now included operations that would never appear in official histories, successes that had reshaped military thinking about unconventional warfare, and a reputation that had spread throughout the highest levels of government. The room was smaller than the Pentagon Conference Center where she had first met General Wheeler, but the people assembled were even more senior in rank and authority. Representatives from multiple intelligence agencies sat alongside military commanders whose decisions affected global security operations. At the center of the gathering was a woman Sarah had never met before, General Patricia Morrison, the first female officer to hold her particular position in the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Sarah's presence at this meeting represented the culmination of a career trajectory that had exceeded even her most ambitious early goals. She now held the rank of lieutenant colonel, having been promoted twice in the past 18 months based on her exceptional performance in classified operations. More importantly, her insights into unconventional warfare had become influential in shaping policy at the strategic level. The briefing began with an overview of global security challenges that had emerged in the wake of Operation Silent Thunder's success. The dismantling of the terrorist network had created power vacuums that were being filled by new and potentially more dangerous organizations. Traditional military responses were proving inadequate against enemies who learned from their predecessors' mistakes and adapted their tactics accordingly. The nature of warfare is changing faster than our institutions can adapt, General Morrison explained to the assembled group. We need officers who can think beyond conventional frameworks and develop strategies for conflicts that don't fit traditional models. Sarah listened carefully as the briefing outlined emerging threats that required innovative responses. Cyber warfare, economic manipulation, hybrid conflicts that blurred the lines between military and civilian targets. The challenges facing military planners were becoming increasingly complex and interconnected. Which brings us to why we're here today. General Morrison continued, turning her attention directly to Sarah. Lieutenant Colonel Chun, your unconventional background and proven ability to operate outside traditional frameworks make you uniquely qualified for what we're proposing. The proposal was unlike anything Sarah had encountered during her military career. Rather than another operational assignment, she was being offered the opportunity to lead the development of an entirely new approach to military training and doctrine. The position would require her to work with the most senior military planners in the country, designing programs that would prepare future officers for the kinds of challenges that conventional military education hadn't anticipated. We want you to create a new kind of training program, General Morrison explained. Something that prepares officers not just for the conflicts we understand, but for the ones we can't yet imagine. Your experience in operations that required adapting to completely unforeseen circumstances makes you ideal for this role. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. The opportunity represented the kind of career advancement that most officers could only dream of achieving. It would also mean transitioning from operational roles to strategic planning and institutional leadership, a fundamental change in how she would serve her country. But as she considered the proposal, Sarah realized that accepting it would also mean saying goodbye to the aspects of military service that had defined her identity. No more direct action operations. No more leading small teams into dangerous situations. No more of the adrenaline-fueled challenges that had made her feel most alive and effective. I appreciate the confidence you're showing in me, Sarah responded carefully. But I need to ask, why now? My current assignment has been successful, and there are certainly officers with more experience in institutional leadership who could handle this kind of responsibility. General Morrison exchanged glances with several other attendees before responding. Because conventional experience and traditional institutional thinking are precisely what we're trying to move beyond. The officers who built their careers managing existing systems may not be the best choices for designing completely new ones. She activated a display screen that showed organizational charts and training curricula from military academies and staff colleges. Our current military education system was designed for conflicts that may no longer be relevant. We need someone who has proven capable of succeeding when all the conventional rules don't apply. The discussion that followed revealed the scope and ambition of what was being proposed. Sarah would be responsible for developing training programs that taught officers to think creatively under pressure, operate effectively with minimal resources and support, and adapt to situations that didn't match their previous experience or training. Essentially, one of the agency representatives explained, "We want to systematize the kind of thinking that made you successful as Specter 6. We want to teach other officers to develop the same adaptability and innovative problem-solving abilities that you've demonstrated." Sarah found herself both flattered and concerned by the proposal. The idea of sharing her experiences and insights with future generations of military leaders was appealing, but she wasn't certain that the qualities that had made her effective in special operations could be taught in a classroom environment. What made me effective wasn't just training, she pointed out. A lot of it came from being forced to adapt to impossible situations where failure meant people died. That's not something you can replicate in a controlled educational setting. General Morrison nodded thoughtfully, which is exactly why we need you to design the program. You understand the difference between academic knowledge and practical application better than anyone else we could choose for this position. The meeting continued for several hours, with detailed discussions about resources, timelines, and institutional support for the proposed program. Sarah asked probing questions about administrative requirements, bureaucratic obstacles, and the kinds of resistance she might encounter from traditional military educators who might view her approaches as threatening to established systems. By the end of the briefing, Sarah had a clear understanding of both the opportunity and the challenges involved in accepting the position. She would have unprecedented authority to reshape military education, but she would also be operating in an institutional environment where change was often difficult and controversial. "I need time to consider this carefully," Sarah said as the meeting concluded. "This kind of decision will affect not just my career, but potentially the careers of thousands of officers who would go through programs I develop." General Morrison stood and extended her hand. "Take all the time you need. But keep in mind that the threats we're facing are evolving faster than our ability to train people to handle them. The sooner we can begin developing new approaches, the better prepared we'll be for whatever comes next. That evening, Sarah found herself walking through the city streets, trying to process everything she had learned during the briefing. The opportunity represented the kind of influence and responsibility that she had never imagined achieving when she first enlisted in the military. But it also represented a fundamental change in her relationship with military service. She thought about the young woman who had first volunteered for special operations, driven by a desire to prove herself capable of handling any challenge. That motivation had evolved over years of combat experience into something more mature. Recognition that military service was ultimately about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Sarah also thought about the soldiers she had served with over the years, the bonds formed in impossible circumstances, and the sense of purpose that came from being part of something larger than herself. Moving into institutional leadership would mean giving up the direct, tangible impact of operational assignments in favor of a more abstract but potentially more far-reaching influence. The decision became clearer when Sarah considered the current state of global conflicts and the challenges facing military organizations. The enemies that future officers would confront would be unlike anything previous generations had encountered. Traditional approaches to military education might leave them unprepared for the kinds of adaptive, creative thinking that would be required. 3 days later, Sarah returned to General Morrison's office with her decision. "I'll accept the position," she said, "but with certain conditions about how the program is structured and implemented." The conditions Sarah outlined reflected her understanding of what made unconventional training effective. The program would need to include real-world stress testing, not just theoretical exercises. Students would need to experience failure and learn to recover from it, not just study successful case histories. Most importantly, the program would need to teach officers to question assumptions and think independently, even when that meant challenging established doctrine. General Morrison agreed to Sarah's conditions, recognizing that her practical experience in unconventional operations made her insights valuable enough to warrant significant flexibility in program design. Within 6 months, Sarah found herself leading a team of educators, psychologists, and subject matter experts in developing curricula that would fundamentally change how military officers were prepared for leadership roles. The program that emerged from their work was unlike anything that had previously existed in military education. It combined traditional tactical training with psychological preparation for extreme stress, strategic thinking exercises that had no predetermined correct answers, and leadership challenges that required students to adapt their approaches based on constantly changing circumstances. Sarah's first class of students included some of the most promising young officers in the military, selected for their demonstrated potential and willingness to embrace unconventional approaches. Teaching them required Sarah to articulate insights and instincts that she had previously relied on without conscious analysis. "The most important thing you can learn," she told her students during one early lecture, "is that the situations that matter most are the ones where your previous training doesn't apply. Your job as leaders will be to succeed anyway." As months passed and the program began producing graduates, Sarah received reports about their performance in various assignments around the world. Officers who had completed her training were distinguishing themselves in exactly the kinds of challenging, ambiguous situations that the program had been designed to address. But perhaps the most meaningful feedback came from an unexpected source. General Wheeler, now retired but still influential in military circles, requested a meeting with Sarah to discuss her work. "I've been watching the officers who've gone through your program," he told her during their conversation. "They're approaching problems differently than their peers, and they're getting better results. You've managed to systematize something that I thought was impossible to teach." Sarah appreciated the recognition, but she also understood that her work was just beginning. The threats facing military organizations would continue evolving, and the approaches she was developing would need to evolve as well. The program she had created was not a final solution, but rather a framework for continuous adaptation and improvement. Years later, when Sarah had been promoted to full colonel and her training programs had been adopted throughout the military establishment, she would sometimes receive messages from former students serving in various capacities around the world. They would describe situations where the unconventional thinking they had learned in her programs had made the difference between mission success and failure, between lives saved and lives lost. It was then, that Sarah truly understood the impact of the decision she had made to transition from operational roles to institutional leadership. The call sign Specter 6 had represented her ability to appear when she was needed most, to accomplish the impossible when everything else had failed. Now, through the officer she had trained and the program she had developed, that same spirit of adaptation and innovation was being multiplied across the entire military. The general had asked for her call sign that day in the briefing room, and when she replied Specter 6, it had led to silence not because of confusion or disrespect, but because everyone present understood the weight of reputation behind those words. She had proven herself capable of operating in the shadows, succeeding where others had failed, and adapting to challenges that conventional thinking couldn't address. But, more than that, she had learned to pass those capabilities on to others, ensuring that the lessons learned through years of dangerous operations would continue to serve her country long after her own operational career had ended. In the end, perhaps that was the most important mission of all, preparing the next generation of leaders to face whatever impossible challenges awaited them in an uncertain world.